has confirmed it's launched an attack on Iran.
The night watch on the deck of the American aircraft carrier was supposed to be routine. Radar screens glowed in the dim light of the Combat Information Center. Fighters sat ready on the catapults, and the vast, dark surface of the sea stretched for miles in every direction. But shortly after midnight, something unusual appeared on the screens. At first it looked like interference, a cluster of faint signals emerging from the edge of radar range. Then the signals multiplied. 10 contacts became 20, 20 became 50, and they were moving fast. Within minutes, the alarm sounded across the carrier strike group. What operators were seeing was not a glitch, it was a swarm. According to early reports circulating among military analysts, dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles had been launched from somewhere beyond the horizon, flying low over the water to avoid detection. Their trajectories converged on a single target, one of the most powerful symbols of American military power at sea: a U.S. aircraft carrier and the ships protecting it. Some intelligence sources claim the drones were part of a new generation of Iranian long-range strike UAVs, designed specifically to overwhelm naval defenses through sheer numbers. Unlike traditional missiles, these drones could change course mid-flight, coordinate with each other, and approach from multiple directions simultaneously. In theory, even the most advanced air defense systems could struggle to stop such a swarm. What happened next unfolded in minutes, but may reshape naval warfare for years. Fighter jets were scrambled from the carrier deck. Destroyers in the strike group activated their Aegis combat systems. Radar operators began tracking dozens of incoming targets skimming just meters above the waves. Electronic warfare teams attempted to jam control signals. Missiles were fired into the night sky. Explosions lit the horizon. Pentagon officials later stated that most of the drones were intercepted before reaching the carrier, but unofficial accounts suggest the attack was far more intense than initially reported. Sailors described a chaotic battle in the darkness, as defensive missiles streaked upward, and the roar of jet engines echoed across the sea. At least a few drones reportedly broke through the outer defensive ring before being destroyed at close range. Where exactly the drones came from remains one of the biggest mysteries. Some analysts believe they were launched from hidden coastal installations deep inside Iranian territory. Others suspect mobile launch platforms on disguised civilian vessels. A third theory suggests that allied militias in the region may have helped coordinate the strike. But one thing is clear: the attack was carefully planned. For years, military experts have warned that aircraft carriers, once considered nearly untouchable, could face a new type of threat in the age of cheap autonomous weapons. A swarm of relatively inexpensive drones might succeed where traditional missiles fail, saturating defenses until something gets through. And that raises an unsettling question. Was this merely a warning shot, or the first demonstration of a new strategy designed to challenge American naval dominance? In this video, we will break down everything known so far about the alleged drone attack on a U.S. aircraft carrier, how the strike may have been organized, what defenses were used to stop it, and why this incident could signal a dramatic shift in the future of warfare at sea. For months before the night of the alleged drone attack, tensions between the United States and Iran had been steadily climbing toward a dangerous breaking point. What many observers initially described as another routine phase of geopolitical rivalry in the Middle East gradually evolved into something far more volatile. Military deployments increased, naval patrols intensified, and both sides began sending unmistakable signals that they were preparing for confrontation rather than negotiation. The roots of the crisis can be traced to a series of escalating incidents across the region. American intelligence reports claimed that Iranian-backed groups had expanded their drone and missile capabilities, supplying advanced unmanned systems to allied militias operating in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. At the same time, satellite imagery published by several defense analysts appeared to show the construction of new underground facilities along Iran's southern coastline, facilities that Western officials suspected were dedicated to the production and storage of long-range drones. Washington responded by reinforcing its naval presence in the region. A carrier strike group centered around the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln was deployed to the Arabian Sea, accompanied by guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and support ships equipped with some of the most advanced missile defense systems in the world. Officially, the deployment was described as a stabilizing presence, meant to deter attacks on international shipping lanes. Unofficially, it was a clear demonstration of force. At the same time, the United States carried out a series of targeted military operations aimed at what it described as Iranian military infrastructure connected to drone development. According to defense officials, several warehouses suspected of storing unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed during precision strikes earlier that month. American commanders argued that these operations were necessary to prevent future attacks on U.S. personnel and allies in the region. Tehran viewed the situation very differently. Iranian officials accused Washington of conducting unlawful military aggression and vowed that any further escalation would be met with a direct response. State media outlets began broadcasting footage of newly unveiled drone models, including long-range strike UAVs capable of flying hundreds of kilometers and carrying explosive payloads designed to target naval vessels. Military commentators on Iranian television openly discussed the vulnerability of large surface ships to coordinated drone swarms. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies on both sides were watching each other closely. U.S. surveillance aircraft reportedly detected increased activity near several Iranian coastal bases, including unusual nighttime movements of trucks and mobile launch platforms. Some analysts later claimed that signals intelligence intercepted in the days before the attack hinted at preparations for a large-scale drone operation, though officials never publicly confirmed the details. Meanwhile, the carrier strike group continued its patrols in international waters, conducting routine flight operations and joint exercises with regional allies. Sailors aboard the ships described an atmosphere that was tense but controlled. Carrier crews had trained extensively for potential missile attacks, but few expected that the most serious threat might come from small, relatively inexpensive unmanned aircraft. According to several defense analysts, Iranian military doctrine had increasingly focused on asymmetric warfare, strategies designed to counter technologically superior forces through unconventional tactics. Instead of attempting to match the United States ship for ship or aircraft for aircraft, Iran invested heavily in missiles, drones, fast attack boats, and electronic warfare systems intended to overwhelm larger forces through coordination and numbers. One particularly concerning development involved swarm tactics using unmanned systems. In military exercises conducted in the region, Iranian forces reportedly demonstrated the ability to launch dozens of drones in rapid succession, coordinating their movements through satellite navigation and encrypted communication links. Some experimental models were even believed to have limited autonomous capabilities, allowing them to continue toward their targets even if control signals were jammed. In the week leading up to the incident, naval patrol aircraft flying over the Arabian Sea reportedly observed several unidentified vessels moving in unusual patterns, roughly 200 miles from the carrier strike group's patrol zone. At the time, these movements attracted little attention. Commercial shipping traffic was common in the region, and nothing about the vessels appeared immediately threatening. But in hindsight, some analysts believe those sightings may have been the first signs that something larger was already being set in motion. By the time radar operators aboard the carrier began noticing faint signals approaching from the darkness over the sea, the confrontation that had been building for weeks may already have entered its most dangerous phase. What started as a political standoff between two longtime rivals was about to turn into a test of modern naval warfare, one that could determine whether even the most powerful warships on Earth were truly prepared for the new age of drone conflict. In the days leading up to the attack, preparations were unfolding far from the open waters where the American carrier strike group was patrolling. Along Iran's southern coastline, in regions dotted with military installations and hardened underground facilities, activity inside several drone bases reportedly intensified. Satellite images analyzed by defense experts showed unusual nighttime vehicle movements, mobile launch platforms being relocated, and several previously inactive hangars suddenly becoming operational. Iranian military officials did not comment publicly on the activity, but within intelligence circles, The pattern raised suspicions that a coordinated operation might be underway. Iran has spent more than a decade investing heavily in unmanned aerial technology. The country's drone program, which began as a relatively modest effort to build surveillance aircraft, gradually expanded into a sophisticated network of reconnaissance and strike systems. Among the most widely discussed platforms are the Shahed series drones, designed to carry explosive payloads over long distances and strike targets with high precision. These drones have been used in multiple conflicts across the Middle East and have become a central element of Iran's strategy to counter technologically superior adversaries. According to several military analysts, the strength of these drones is not necessarily their individual power, but their ability to operate in coordinated groups. Unlike traditional missiles, which follow predictable ballistic trajectories, many modern UAVs can alter their flight paths during the mission. They can approach targets from multiple angles, fly at extremely low altitudes to evade radar detection, and in some cases, communicate with other drones in the swarm to adjust their attack patterns. This concept, often referred to as saturation warfare, is designed to overwhelm even advanced air defense systems by presenting too many simultaneous threats. Intelligence sources later suggested that the attack may have been prepared over several stages. In the first phase, Iranian reconnaissance drones were reportedly launched days earlier to monitor the movements of the American carrier group from a distance. These drones, flying at high altitude, would have collected information about radar coverage, defensive formations, and patrol routes. Some analysts believe the reconnaissance aircraft were able to remain undetected because they stayed beyond the effective range of ship-based radars. The second phase likely involved positioning the strike drones themselves. While some experts believe they were launched from coastal bases inside Iran, another theory suggests that several drones may have been deployed from mobile launch units, hidden on civilian cargo vessels operating in international waters. Such tactics would make it extremely difficult for intelligence agencies to identify the launch point in advance. A few reports even suggested that modified shipping containers equipped with concealed drone launch systems may have been used, technology that Iranian engineers have reportedly experimented with during military exercises. According to leaked details discussed by defense commentators, the operation may have included between 30 and 50 unmanned aircraft. Most were believed to be loitering munitions, drones designed to fly toward a target area and then dive into it with an explosive payload. A smaller number may have been electronic warfare drones, tasked with confusing radar systems or disrupting communications within the carrier strike group. The drones themselves were likely programmed with preloaded navigation routes. Many Iranian UAVs rely on satellite navigation combined with terrain-following flight profiles, allowing them to travel hundreds of kilometers while staying close to the ocean's surface. Flying low over the water dramatically reduces the distance at which radar systems can detect incoming threats, giving defending forces less time to respond. One detail that later attracted attention from military observers involved the timing of the attack. According to some reports, the drones were launched during a narrow window when the carrier strike group was conducting routine flight operations. During these periods, aircraft are constantly taking off and landing, and radar operators are already tracking multiple friendly signals. Introducing dozens of small incoming contacts into that environment could significantly complicate the defensive response. Several analysts also speculated that the operation may have been coordinated through encrypted satellite communications, allowing operators to monitor the drone's progress in real time. However, it is equally possible that many of the drones were designed to complete their missions autonomously once launched, continuing toward their programmed targets even if communications were lost. Whether launched from hidden coastal bases or covert platforms at sea, the drones began their long flight across the dark waters of the Arabian Sea. For hours, they traveled silently, their small engines barely audible above the wind and waves. At low altitude and spread across a wide formation, they were difficult to detect and even harder to track. By the time the first faint signals began appearing on radar screens aboard the American warships, the drones had already covered most of the distance to their target. The final stage of the operation, the attack itself, was only minutes away. Shortly after midnight, the quiet rhythm of routine operations aboard the American carrier strike group was broken by a subtle but alarming signal inside the Combat Information Center. Radar operators monitoring the long-range surveillance systems noticed several small contacts appearing near the outer edge of detection range. At first, the returns looked insignificant, weak signals moving slowly across the screen. In busy maritime regions, this kind of radar noise was not unusual. Fishing vessels, drifting debris, or atmospheric interference could all produce similar signatures. But within minutes, the number of contacts began to grow. What first appeared to be a handful of objects soon multiplied into dozens. The signals were small, moving low over the surface of the sea and approaching from multiple directions. That pattern immediately triggered concern among the radar operators. One of the officers on watch reportedly ordered a manual verification through secondary radar systems. When the results came back, the conclusion was unavoidable. The contacts were airborne, and they were converging on the strike group. Within moments, the carrier's internal alert network activated. A warning echoed through the corridors of the ship, and red lighting illuminated sections of the command center as the vessel shifted into a higher defensive posture. On the radar screens, the cluster of approaching objects continued to grow clearer. Analysts quickly determined that the targets were flying extremely low, just a few meters above the ocean's surface, likely an attempt to remain hidden beneath the radar horizon until the last possible moment. Destroyers escorting the carrier immediately began coordinating through the strike group's integrated command network. Modern U.S. naval formations rely heavily on the Aegis combat system, a sophisticated platform capable of tracking and engaging dozens of threats simultaneously. Within seconds, the system began calculating possible interception solutions. As the unidentified aircraft closed the distance, the situation escalated rapidly. Officers confirmed that the objects were not following commercial flight routes and were moving at speeds consistent with small, unmanned aerial vehicles. The pattern suggested a coordinated attack. Fighter pilots who had been on standby aboard the carrier were ordered to their aircraft. Within minutes, several jets were launched into the night sky, their engines roaring as they climbed into the darkness above the fleet. At the same time, electronic warfare teams activated countermeasures designed to disrupt drone navigation systems. The first intercept attempt came from the outer defensive ring. Guided missile destroyers positioned several kilometers from the carrier launched surface-to-air missiles toward the approaching swarm. Bright flashes illuminated the horizon as the missiles streaked upward before diving toward their targets. Radar screens showed multiple drones disappearing from tracking displays as the interceptors detonated nearby. But the swarm kept coming. The problem with drone attacks is not necessarily the power of each individual aircraft, but the sheer number of targets appearing at once. Even advanced defense systems must prioritize which threats to engage first. Some drones approached from the east, others from the south, forcing the defensive network to divide its attention across several vectors. As the distance narrowed, the carrier group activated additional layers of protection. Close-range missile systems aboard escort ships fired rapid volleys into the air, while automated gun systems prepared for the possibility that some drones might slip through the outer defensive barrier. Pilots flying combat air patrol above the fleet soon reported visual contact. According to later accounts, the drones appeared as small, dark shapes skimming just above the waves, barely visible except for faint navigation lights or engine heat signatures detected through infrared sensors. Fighter jets engaged several of them using air-to-air missiles, destroying targets before they could approach the ships. Despite these efforts, a portion of the swarm continued advancing. At this stage of the engagement, the battle had become chaotic. Radar operators were tracking dozens of moving objects simultaneously, some of which were real drones, while others were fragments or decoys created by earlier explosions. Communications channels buzzed with rapid exchanges between ships as commanders attempted to coordinate the defense. Several drones managed to penetrate the outer missile defense perimeter. Once inside that range, the strike group relied on close-in weapon systems, rapid-fire automated cannons capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. These systems are designed as the last line of defense against incoming threats. Sailors stationed on the deck of one escort ship later described seeing streaks of tracer fire cutting across the sky as the guns opened up. In the darkness above the water, several drones exploded into fragments as they were struck by defensive fire. Others veered off course, possibly affected by electronic jamming attempts. One particularly tense moment reportedly occurred when a drone approached within several kilometers of the carrier itself. Radar tracking suggested it had managed to evade earlier interception attempts by flying beneath the engagement envelope of certain missile systems. As the drone closed the distance, a destroyer positioned between it and the carrier launched a final interceptor missile, destroying the aircraft seconds before it could reach the inner defense zone. Explosions continued across the horizon as remaining drones were gradually eliminated. Some were destroyed by missiles, others by fighter aircraft, and several appeared to crash into the ocean after losing navigation control. Within roughly 20 minutes of the first radar detection, the majority of the incoming threats had been neutralized. Once the immediate danger passed, the strike group remained on high alert. Radar operators continued scanning for additional contacts, while helicopters equipped with searchlights were launched to inspect the surrounding waters for debris. Burning fragments from destroyed drones reportedly floated across sections of the ocean's surface, confirming that many of the incoming aircraft had been intercepted before reaching their targets. Preliminary assessments conducted in the hours after the incident indicated that the carrier itself had not been damaged. Escort ships also reported no significant structural impacts, although at least one destroyer was said to have recovered fragments believed to be from an explosive drone that had been destroyed at very close range. Analysts later suggested that the debris contained components consistent with Iranian-designed loitering munitions, though officials stopped short of making definitive public conclusions. Military experts reviewing the event later noted that the defensive systems performed largely as intended. The layered protection used by carrier strike groups, long-range missiles, fighter aircraft, electronic warfare, and close-in guns proved capable of handling a complex drone attack. However, analysts also pointed out that the engagement demonstrated how quickly such situations could become overwhelming if the number of incoming drones were significantly larger. Some unofficial reports suggested that several drones came closer to the fleet than initial public statements indicated. According to these accounts, at least a handful of aircraft were destroyed within the inner defensive zone, only seconds away from potential impact. Even if those drones carried relatively small explosive charges, a successful strike on a sensitive part of a warship could have caused serious damage. In the hours following the encounter, the carrier strike group adjusted its patrol formation and increased aerial surveillance across a wider perimeter. Intelligence analysts began examining the recovered debris in an attempt to determine exactly where the drones had originated and how the attack had been coordinated. What had started as a few faint radar signals in the darkness had rapidly turned into one of the most intense defensive engagements the fleet had faced in years. And while the ships remained operational, the incident left military planners confronting an unsettling reality. The next attack might involve not dozens of drones, but hundreds. In the hours after the incident, the political and military reaction began unfolding almost as quickly as the attack itself. While the ships of the carrier strike group remained on alert in the Arabian Sea, statements started emerging from Washington, Tehran, and several allied capitals. Each side presented a different interpretation of what had happened, and the information battle quickly became nearly as intense as the confrontation at sea. Officials at the U.S. Department of Defense confirmed that American naval forces had intercepted what they described as a large number of hostile unmanned aerial vehicles approaching the strike group. Pentagon representatives emphasized that the layered defense systems of the fleet had functioned effectively, and that the carrier and its escort ships remained fully operational. However, they avoided providing precise numbers regarding how many drones were involved or how close the aircraft had come to the vessels before being destroyed. Military analysts noted that such caution is common after active engagements, particularly when intelligence agencies are still assessing the source and capabilities of the weapons used. Privately, several defense experts suggested that the event would likely accelerate ongoing discussions within the U.S. Navy about adapting naval doctrine to the rapidly evolving threat posed by drone swarms.